As the people walking down the street began to give the rival goddesses a wide berth, the elf panicked and shouted, "Wait, Loki. Please stop." But that was like the opening bell of a fight. The two deities flew at each other, hurling insults as they pulled at hair and pinched cheeks in an embarrassing display. When Loki's followers finally pulled them apart, they were both out of breath, their shoulders heaving as they smoothed down their disheveled hair and caught their breath. "Damn it, I can't move like I used to. A couch potato like you couldn't cut it in heaven." Loki wiped the sweat from his chin and looked up with a nasty smile. Hestia turned her back on Loki's exasperated followers and looked down. "Whatever. Go ahead and try as hard as you can. Knowing you, you'll run away from Orario with your tail between your legs after your family doesn't produce a single child. Ha 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 ha." As Loki laughed shrilly with his family arrayed behind her, all Hestia could do was grit her teeth as she stood alone. "And that's how it happened," Hephaestus, a red-faced Hestia explained to her friend. "Ha ha ha ha. You really were defeated right after you descended from the heavens, weren't you?" They were inside a large building resembling a volcano, located in the northern part of the city. After Loki left the scene of his battle, Hestia managed to find Hephaestus' base of operations and received a warm welcome. In the goddess chambers, Hestia angrily recounted her fight with Loki to the eye-patch-wearing Hephaestus, whose shoulders shook with unbridled laughter. "I'll show that stupid Loki making the greatest family of all. I'll make her regret the day she started fighting with me." Well well. That's a lofty goal. You know that Loki's team is the best family in town, right? Like I care. Hestia shot back across the table. Despite claiming that her aspirations were unrealistic, the amused Hephaestus seemed to be regarding Hestia's enthusiasm and energy with a certain fondness. "You just got here and you can barely tell the difference. We were friends back in the sky, so I'll help you get back on your feet. If you need anything, just let me know." "I appreciate that, Hephaestus." Hestia thanked her friend even as she pictured Loki's disgusting face. "Just you wait," she thought. Families were directly tied to a god status in the mortal realm, and Hestia burned with determination to gather a huge family so she could earn some serious returns. Just then, she heard the sound of the bedroom door opening. "Hey, boss, we bought too much at the stall. Want some?" "Oh, whoops, are you still talking?" "No, it's okay, Tsubaki." One of Hephaestus's family members, a half-dwarf woman, entered the room, carrying a large paper bag. Hestia's nose twitched at the tantalizing aroma of oil and salt wafting from it, and she peered closely at the bag. Hephaestus, what's this?" "Street food is available anywhere in Orario. They're called Jayaga Maru Kuin, young goddess." "Want some?" the half-dwarf offered with a smile, completing her mistress's sentence. She, like Hephaestus, wore an eye patch. Hephaestus smiled wryly at the scene, his follower trying to feed a deity before he had even introduced himself first, and his old friend regarding the potato snack with deep interest. Eventually, Hestia embraced the stranger and helped herself to some. Immediately after popping one into her mouth, Hestia exclaimed, "It's so good." Beside the cackling half-dwarf, Hestia stared wide-eyed at the potato dumplings, trembling in shock. This was the moment she had experienced for the first time one of the many pleasures of the material world, the joy of good food. And this was the beginning of her downfall. 3 months later. Hestia laughed, sprawled on the couch in the Hephaestos Familia's guest room, where she was allowed to stay until she established her own family. In front of her was a book, and on a plate next to her was a mountain of French fries. She would eat one, go back to reading, and then laugh. Before long, she would eat another, starting the cycle all over again. There was no evidence that she had left the room or at any time soon. When Hephaestus stopped by the guest room, she admonished the little goddess. Hestia, you need to hurry up and start recruiting children for your familia. You should know that getting one established is no easy task. Yes, I'll start tomorrow, Hestia said without looking up from her book. This had been the newly arrived goddess's life for the past 3 months. Starting with potato chips, Hestia had cared for nothing but the dazzling offerings of food and books from the mortal plane. Hestia, like many deities, had fallen prey to these earthly pleasures, and in doing so, she had shown her true nature. Namely, that she was profoundly lazy. Hestia had tended to live a life of idle seclusion even during her time in the heavens, but after being introduced to various earthly pleasures, she took her enjoyment of idleness to incredible new heights. She would spend entire days holed up in the guest room, begging for potato dumplings and new reading material from the followers of the goddess of the forge. Day after day, Hephaestus would come to warn her, only for Hestia to respond with assurances that she would start tomorrow. Once tomorrow arrived, Hestia would forget all about starting a family of her own, until finally, Hephaestus's reserve of patience for the idle, self-indulgent Hestia ran dry. Hephaestus dragged Hestia out of his home and kicked her to the curb, where Hestia collapsed awkwardly. What are you doing, Hephaestus? Hestia began to protest, looking up, only to be greeted by the sight of a crimson-haired, crimson-eyed goddess of fury, arms crossed and legs spread wide in an intimidating stance. I gave you the bounty of letting you stay here, and yet day after day you do nothing but lounge around, Hephaestos. It was my mistake to give in to you like this. You must get a taste of how harsh this world can be. And don't you darken my door again. After the enraged Hephaestus had thoroughly terrified Hestia, she closed the gate to her home. Cast out of her host's splendid abode in such a sorry state, the young goddess staggered to her feet. What is her problem? I was just taking some time off to have some fun. It's only been 3 months. Hestia grumbled. As a deity who still saw everything through the lens of someone who would live forever, she didn't understand. Or, to be more precise, reality hadn't yet sunk in for her, that she no longer lived in the heavens, but in the world below. Well, whatever. I'll start a family and find a place to live in no time. After all, this is to get revenge on Loki. When she finally remembered her original goal, Hestia began to walk away from the Hephaestos familia's house. Her destination was a large avenue where humans and demi-humans thronged. When it comes to who I want in my family, I definitely want children with the goal of becoming adventurers. This is Labyrinth City, after all. Hestia said as she stood on the edge of the wide street. Even lazy Hestia realized that finances were the top priority in the human world. She scanned the traffic for children who seemed to have not yet been recruited by other gods. I don't think I would get along with this child, there's a disgusting one, and this one is too young. Hestia's divine blue eyes studied the children passing by, Amazons, animal people, plums, and more. Despite her flaws, Hestia was still a divine being who could sense the inner nature of mortals. If she exchanged a few words with them, she could gain a solid understanding of their personality. A mortal can never deceive a god, was a saying well known to the residents of both worlds. As she continued to scout out a likely candidate, Hestia's eyes lingered on a certain elf girl. I found one, Hestia said as she approached her. The girl was dressed lightly and was visibly equipped with a bow and quiver. She looked very much like someone who wanted to make a living as an adventurer. Hestia called out in a friendly voice. Greetings, elf. From the look of you, I bet you haven't signed a contract with a god yet. Care to join my familia? Standing tall and proud so as not to tarnish her celestial gravitas, she greeted the elf with energy and good humor. The elf looked the smaller Hestia up and down, assessing her carefully. Forgive me, goddess, but may I ask your name? It's Hestia. Hestia Famila. I don't believe I've heard of it. If it's a new faction, where are you from? How many members do you currently have? What's the salary range? Huh. Wadash. Hestia flinched at the elf's barrage of questions. Perhaps sensing something of Hestia's complete inability to answer, the elf narrowed her eyes warily, the expression on her coldly beautiful features changing. "What's your family's operating model?" Well. I was thinking it would be nice to make some money in the dungeon." Skewering the goddess with an icy glare, the elf interrupted Hestia's feeble attempt to obscure the fact that she had no plan. Without a word of farewell, the elf turned her back on the crestfallen deity. The child's form retreated quickly, as if declaring that her time had been wasted. She looked at me like I was trash. Hestia was stunned. No goddess deserved such treatment, and yet. As a newcomer to this world, Hestia had no way of knowing that dungeon-oriented families usually made their preparations outside the city before entering Ororio proper. It was difficult to make a living from dungeon expeditions without preparing a certain amount of personnel and funding in advance. At the very least, it was evident to everyone that Hestia Familia was in for a tough road.